The grandfather clock in the Oval Office had been ticking for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds when Muhammad Ali realized the President of the United States was waiting for him to speak first. Nixon sat behind the resolute desk, his fingers drumming once against the polished wood before going completely still. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy curtains in thin, precise lines that cut across the carpet between them. Ali could smell the leather of his chair, the lingering tobacco from Nixon's previous meeting, and something else, the particular sterile cleanliness of power. The walk to this moment had started 3 hours earlier in a hotel room 6 blocks away, where Ali had stood before a mirror adjusting his tie for the 7th time. His lawyer, Charles Morgan, had paced behind like a caged animal, rehearsing talking points that both men knew would be useless once the door closed. "Remember," Morgan had said, checking his watch again, "this meeting doesn't exist. No records, no transcripts, no witnesses. Whatever happens in there stays in there." Ali had nodded, but his mind was already in the Oval Office, already feeling the weight of presidential scrutiny. He'd fought Sonny Liston with less nervous energy than what was building in his chest as the black car wound through Washington traffic. "Mr. Clay." "Ali." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Nixon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the kind of micro-expression that cameras never caught, but opponents always felt. Around them, the Oval Office held its breath. No odds, no press, no witnesses except the portraits of dead presidents watching from their frames. Ali had been in this chair for less than 5 minutes, but he could already feel the weight of every second. His lawyer had told him this meeting didn't exist. No official record, no photographers beyond the door, just 2 men who represented everything the other stood against, sitting 8 feet apart in the most powerful room in America. Nixon leaned back, studying Ali with the same intensity he'd once reserved for Khrushchev. The president's eyes were darker than they appeared on television, more calculating. Behind him, the American flag hung motionless in air, so still it might have been painted. "You know why you're here." It wasn't a question. Ali's hands remained perfectly still on the arms of his chair, even though every instinct told him to shift, to gesture, to fill the silence with the words that had made him famous. But this wasn't a press conference. This wasn't Madison Square Garden. This was a room where wars were decided, and Ali understood that his next words could determine whether he ever fought again. The president opened a manila folder. Inside, Ali could see the edge of documents, official seals, the kind of papers that could restore a boxing license with single signature, or bury it forever. The folder was thick, maybe 50 pages, and Ali wondered how much his life was documented in there. Every court appearance, every statement to press, every moment since he'd first said, "I ain't got no quarrel with the Viet Cong." "Your people think you're being persecuted," Nixon said, still not looking up from the folder. The pages rustled as he turned them, each sound sharp in the silence. "Martyr for your beliefs." Ali's throat was dry, but he didn't reach for the water glass that sat untouched on the small table beside his chair. Behind Nixon, through the bulletproof windows, he could see the Washington Monument piercing the gray October sky. Somewhere beyond that, in Houston, the Supreme Court was still deciding his fate. In New York, the Boxing Commission was still holding his license hostage. In Louisville, his mother was still waiting by the phone. Nixon turned another page, and Ali caught a glimpse of a photographed paperclip to some official document. It was grainy, black and white, taken from a distance. Ali walking into the federal building in Houston, his lawyer beside him, protesters on both sides of the walkway, some holding signs supporting him, others calling for his imprisonment. "Are you?" Nixon finally looked up, his fingers still resting on the photograph. "A martyr?" The question landed with surgical precision. Ali felt his chest tighten, not from fear but from recognition. He knew this game. Strip away the ceremony, the protocol, the power. This was still 2 fighters circling each other, looking for the weakness that would end everything. Nixon continued, his voice steady as a metronome. "The war's winding down. Public opinion is shifting. In 6 months, maybe 12, this whole Vietnam situation becomes a footnote." He closed the folder with a soft snap. "But your prime years?" 29 years old, Clay. Ali, whatever name you prefer. Those years don't come back. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung back and forth, each tick echoing off the curved walls. Ali could hear his own heartbeat underneath it, steady but insistent. He thought about the gym in Miami where Angelo Dundee was probably watching younger fighters, wondering if his greatest discovery would ever throw another punch that mattered. He thought about the sparring partners who used the lineup for the privilege of getting knocked down by the heavyweight champion, now taking real fights, building their own careers while it's gathered dust. "You could be back in the ring by Christmas," Nixon said, his voice taking on the tone of a businessman closing a deal. "Madison Square Garden, Las Vegas, wherever you want. The commission follows federal guidance, and federal guidance follows this office." Ali's eyes moved to the folder. Inside those papers was everything he'd lost: the heavyweight championship, the respect of half the boxing world, millions in purse money, the chance to be remembered as the greatest instead of the guy who threw it all away. All of it sitting 18 inches from Nixon's manicured fingernails. Nixon reached for a crystal paperweight on his desk, turning it slowly in his hands as he spoke. The weight caught the light, throwing small rainbows across the ceiling that moved as Nixon's fingers moved. "There's just one thing." Nixon's voice dropped barely above a whisper, the paperweight now perfectly still in his palm. "A statement. Nothing dramatic. Just acknowledgement that your position on the war was hasty, ill-advised, that you've had time to reconsider the complexities of American foreign policy." The president set down the paperweight and reached into his jacket, withdrawing a single sheet of paper with the deliberate care of a magician, revealing the final card. He placed it on the desk between them, positioning it so Ali could read every word without having to lean forward. From where Ali sat, he could see typed words, official letterhead, a space at the bottom for a signature. The statement was shorter than he'd expected, maybe 40 words total, carefully crafted to sound like reflection rather than capitulation. But Ali recognized the trap within the careful language. Once he signed that paper, he would no longer be the man who'd sacrificed everything for principle. He would become the man who'd gotten his principles confused. Ali's fingers tightened on the chair arms. Nixon waited, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp as a hawk watching prey. The silence stretched until it became its own presence in the room, heavy as smoke, pressing against the windows and walls. Ali could feel sweat beginning to form between his shoulder blades, but his face remained impassive. 3 years of legal battles had taught him the power of stillness. Every lawyer, every judge, every reporter had tried to crack him with silence, waiting for him to fill the void with words that could be used against him. "My staff tells me you're broke," Nixon said suddenly, conversational now, as if they were discussing the weather. He picked up another document from his desk, scanning it casually. "Legal fees. No income. That big house in Cherry Hill carrying a mortgage you can't pay." Ali's jaw muscle flexed once, the only sign that the words had found their target. "Your wife, Belinda, she's been taking accounting classes at community college. Try and keep the books straight while you're gone to all these court appearances." Nixon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's admirable, but unnecessary." The president set down the document and folded his hands. "I have daughters too, you know. Tricia and Julie. They worry about their father making the right choices, carrying burdens he doesn't have to carry." He paused, his voice softening just enough to suggest understanding without offering weakness. "Family men understand sacrifice differently than single men do." The grandfather clock chimed once for the half hour. Nixon glanced at it, then back to Ali with renewed focus, as if the sound had reminded him of something urgent. "You're not the first person to sit in that chair and face this choice. In 1952, I had to decide whether to stay on Eisenhower's ticket or step down over some campaign fund allegations. Know what the difference was between political survival and political death." Ali said nothing, but his eyes remained locked on Nixon's face, knowing when principle becomes pride, and when pride becomes stupidity. Nixon stood and walked to the windows, his steps muffled by the thick carpet. His movements were controlled, presidential, but Ali sensed restlessness underneath the composure. Outside, a helicopter was landing on the south lawn, its rotors throwing fallen leaves in wild spirals. The sound penetrated even the bulletproof glass, a rhythmic thumping that seemed to match Ali's heartbeat. "I respect what you think you're doing," Nixon said to glass, his reflection ghost-like in the window. "Standing up for your beliefs. Very American, actually, but you're not the only one with beliefs, Clay. Ali, every parent who sent a son to Southeast Asia has beliefs too. Every family in Omaha or Detroit or Birmingham who sees their boy come home in a box, they have beliefs about duty and sacrifice." He turned around, and Ali saw something different in his expression now. Not anger, exactly, but the hard certainty of a man who'd never doubted his own righteousness. The helicopter outside had stopped, but the silence that followed seemed even more oppressive than the noise had been. "You think you're Muhammad Ali, heavyweight champion, standing on principle. But to half this country, you're just another rich athlete who won't serve when called, who hides behind religion when it's convenient." Nixon walked back to the desk, but didn't sit. Instead, he placed both hands flat on the polished surface, leaning forward like a lawyer presenting closing arguments. The presidential seal embedded in the desk's leather top seemed to glow between his palms. "I can change that narrative. One statement, one press conference, and you go from unpatriotic draft dodger to thoughtful American who made a mistake and corrected it. The comeback story writes itself. Hell, you might be more popular than before." Nixon's voice took on the cadence of a man who'd sold bigger dreams to more important people. "Think about the fights we could arrange. Frazier, of course. The public's been waiting 3 years for that one. But after that, new challenges. Young fighters who've come up while you were away. George Foreman's making noise. Ken Norton's got a mean left hook. The division's wide open, and you could walk right back into the center of it." Ali could feel the president stare like heat from a lamp. Every instinct he developed in the ring, reading opponents, sensing weakness, knowing when to attack or defend, was firing simultaneously. But this wasn't a fight he could win with reflexes. Nixon reached into his desk drawer and pulled out another folder, this one thinner than the first. He opened it without breaking eye contact with Ali. "Or," Nixon continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, "you can walk out of here and spend the next 5 years in courtrooms and law libraries while Joe Frazier and George Foreman divide up your legacy. Your choice." The new folder contained what looked like financial documents, columns of numbers that Ali couldn't read from his chair, but that Nixon seemed to know by heart. Current legal debts, $467,000. Projected income for the next 12 months, 0. Time until bankruptcy, 8 months, assuming no major new legal expenses. Nixon looked up from the papers. "Of course, if the Supreme Court rules against you, there'll be plenty of new expenses. Prison isn't free, you know. The government bills you for room and board." The paper on the desk seemed to glow in the afternoon light. 40 words that could erase 3 years of courtrooms and uncertainty. Ali's eyes moved across its surface, catching fragments. Upon reflection, complexity of global affairs. Support for American servicemen. 30 words to get his life back. Ali looked up at Nixon, who was watching him with the patience of a man who negotiated with Brezhnev and Mao. The president's face showed no doubt about the outcome. This was simply a matter of time, pressure, and inevitability. Ali's left hand moved slightly on the chair arm. Nixon's eyes tracked a movement, like a hunter watching for the slightest sign of weakness. The helicopter outside had stopped, but Ali could still hear its echo in his ears. Or maybe that was his pulse. He thought about the sparring sessions in Miami, the way leather felt against his knuckles, the roar crowds in Louisville and London and Manila. He thought about his daughter Mariam, barely walking, who would grow up either knowing her father as champion or as the man who gave it all away for words nobody would remember. He thought about the gym where he'd trained as a teenager, how Cassius Clay had become Muhammad Ali one morning when nobody was watching, the change happening so gradually, and then so suddenly that even he couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when the old self had died and the new one had been born. Nixon reached for a pen from his desk set, expensive gold that caught the light and threw tiny reflections across the presidential seal. He held it out across the space between them, close enough that Ali could see his own distorted image in its polished surface. "It's just a name on a piece of paper," Nixon said quietly. Nobody expects you to believe every word. Politics is theater, Clay. Ali, everyone knows that. The statement gets filed, the cameras record it, and then we all move on to more important things. You go back to fighting. I go back to running the country, and this whole unpleasant chapter becomes a footnote in both our biographies. Ali stared at the pen for a long moment, watching light play across its surface. In that reflection, he could see not just his own face, but the faces of everyone who'd stood with him during the 3 darkest years of his life. His wife, his lawyers, the fans who'd sent letters of support, the activists who'd made him a symbol of resistance he'd never asked to become. But he could also see the faces of those who'd turned away, the boxing establishment that had stripped his title without a second thought, the sports writers who called him a coward and a traitor, the fans who'd burned his picture and mailed him death threats. All of them waiting to see if Muhammad Ali was just another fighter after all. Then he stood up. The movement was fluid, controlled, no sudden gestures that might alarm the Secret Service agents outside the door. But something in the way Ali rose, the straightness of his back, the careful positioning of his feet, the way he looked down at the paper one final time, made Nixon's expression change for the first time since the meeting began. The pen remained extended in Nixon's hand, steady as a sword. Ali looked down at the paper one more time, reading the words that would restore everything he'd lost. 40 words that would make him champion again, wealthy again, beloved again. 40 words that would also make him someone else entirely. Mr. President, Ali said, his voice quiet but carrying the full weight of 3 years' conviction. I appreciate you taking this meeting. Nixon's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Ali took a step toward the door, then paused. But I can't sign something that makes me smaller than I was when I walked in here. The silence that followed was different from before, not expectant but final, like the moment after a bell when both fighters know the round is over. Nixon slowly lowered the pen to his desk. His face showed no surprise, no anger, just a flat calculation of a politician who'd miscalculated but wouldn't make the same mistake twice. You understand what this means, Nixon said. Ali nodded once. Yes, sir. Eat, though. He walked to the door without looking back. His hand was on the brass handle when Nixon spoke again. Clay. Ali stopped but didn't turn around. History won't remember this conversation, but it'll remember what happens next. Ali opened the door and stepped into the hallway, where 2 Secret Service agents fell in to step beside him. Behind him, he could hear Nixon pick up his phone, already moving to the next item on an agenda that no longer included Muhammad Ali. The walk through the White House corridors felt longer than the walk-in, past paintings of Washington and Lincoln, past tourists being guided through public rooms, past staffers who glanced at him with mixtures of recognition and confusion. Ali kept his pace steady, his face composed, even as he felt the weight of his decision settling around him like a fighter's robe. As they approached the exit, one of the Secret Service agents, a young black man who'd remained silent throughout the escort, leaned close enough to whisper, My father was a Golden Gloves boxer in Detroit. He thinks you're doing the right thing. Ali nodded but said nothing. Outside, October air hit his face like freedom itself.